Hi guys, welcome back to Ixy Labs. I'm sitting here with Karl Sainz Martinez, who is the chief engineer at Hack the Senses, and we will be talking about sensory augmentation and what it is and what can it do for you. Would you like to give us a little intro about yourself and Hack the Senses and how did you end up with this fantastic job?
Of course. So yeah, hi, I'm Carlos, or Karl as I'm more commonly known around these parts. And yeah, as Anna said, I am the chief engineer of Hack the Senses. And also, whenever I can, I try to squeeze some time in for my PhD, which I'm about to finish.
It's just PhDs, don't worry about
I know. It's only been, 5 years of my life? Yeah, it's fine. So Hack the Senses is a little company where we like to produce experiences so that people can come in and play around and explore the senses and how they relate to our lives. And like to play and, as our name suggests, hack the senses in a lot of nice creative ways. And how I got this job was actually quite entirely by coincidence, really. I was at an academic conference presenting something for my PhD, and I was working also as a student volunteer. So I was running around making sure that everything was working. And I was, in one of my brief resting periods, I got to go and look at this one researcher that was working on sensory augmentation. And it's just so happened that Imre, one of the founders of the company, was there trying to talk to the same person about it. And he heard
competing for the attention of the same. Yeah,
and he caught just a little bit of my conversation with him, and he was like, "Oh, hey, dude, yeah, we need to talk. So you're into sensory augmentation, all right? So this is what you're doing, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I need to run though," and I just gave him my card. 6 months later, he emails me out of the blue and says, "Hey, so you're an engineer, right? And you're interested in the senses. Come work for us." And I said, "Yeah," and. Here I am.
Would you like to say a few words maybe about what exactly is your field of expertise and how does it look like in practice?
Of course. So sensory augmentation as a field comes out of this field of sensory substitution. And what sensory substitution means is to take sensory information that is usually perceived by one sense and convey it to someone by a completely different sense. And this comes from around about the 60s, 70s. There was this man called Paul Bacchi-Rita, Dr. Bacchi-Rita, and he did some research on what he called a tactile visual sensory substitution system. Now, what this device was a little camera that was connected to a set of vibrating motors arranged in a little matrix on the back, on the lower back here. Mm-hmm. And what it did is that the image that was captured by the camera was converted into essentially a tactile image where, depending on the color and depending on the brightness and so on, it would translate to a stronger or weaker vibration at a different part of the back. And through this, blind people were able to explore their surroundings, pick up objects, and generally interact with their surroundings much in the same way as a sighted person could.
So the swap has happened, or had happened.
Well, yeah, and I think the biggest sign of that was, for example, one participant's case who he was wearing the device and he didn't know that Dr. Bacchi-Rita was showing off the device to somebody else. And so Bacchi-Rita cranked up the zoom on the device, which to the person wearing it felt like the entire room was just inching towards them really, really quickly. Wow. And what they did is they just jumped backwards. But if you think about it, that's a really odd response because he was feeling things on the back, not on the front. So his brain had already, as you said, made this swap and was...
He internalized
he was interpreting that as something coming from the front. So that tells you that there's certainly something sensory going on. And so sensory augmentation is using those same techniques of using your existing senses as input channels, but using a completely new sense as the information that you're giving in. So
not creating a new sense.
Exactly, yeah. And so far, that's mostly been used for things like directional spatial senses. I mean, one famous device is the field space belt, which is a little belt that has a series of vibrating motors all around the waist at regular intervals. And whichever one is vibrating at any one time depends on where north is. So, for example, let's say north is over there, and I were wearing the belt, I would be feeling something round about this area. And as I turn around, it would stay in that area relative to me because it would jump from motor to motor. And then I would always know that north is that way. And this
your body becomes the compass.
Exactly, yes. And this device has been used in sort of long-term trials where some participants have said after maybe 7 weeks or so of wearing it all day, every day for outdoor, indoor navigation and so on, that they stopped feeling the vibration unless they concentrate. They can't tell that there's something vibrating.
Right.
And yet, they're always aware that there's something in that direction. Now, whether that's helped them a lot in navigation or not, well, there's a bit of debate. But what is true is that they're definitely showing something that isn't exactly touch that they're feeling. It's something slightly different. And
like
that's
adopting a sense from the animal kingdom or something. It feels a little bit like we're augmenting in a very mindful way of kind of what's going on. But I remember you mentioned in an earlier chat this idea about teaching pilots how to see without seeing when the weather conditions are so bad. So we do already see really good results of this type of playing around with technology.
And as I say, well, so this pilot thing, people were there's these jackets, these vests that you can wear. They're still very much in an experimental state. I mean, I'm not aware of any major military or civilian airspace company that is employing them regularly. But yes, I mean, and they're used so that pilots can know the attitude of their plane. So whether it's going too much to one side or whether it's facing the right way or anything like that without having to look at the instruments, which, I mean, it's immediately obvious how useful that can be, especially if you're, for the sake of argument, landing on an aircraft carrier or something where you need to be very concentrated. You can't just look at all your devices. Yeah. But even for slightly more down-to-earth applications, so there's an equivalent kind of thing for driving. There's some driver's seats that use this technology to make you aware of where the cars are around you, and that might be a lot more relevant to a lot of people. Sure. Because it's something so that
more drivers than pilots.
And it's and there's a lot more problems. It's a much more serious problem. People having accidents on the roads than with planes. I mean, planes tend to be fairly safe.
Sure.
If this sort of stuff actually starts working and reducing fatalities and reducing accidents, then
it's worth it.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see governments mandating this sort of stuff to be installed in vehicles if this kind of stuff starts working in other vehicles.
Whenever we're talking about either substitution or augmentation when it comes to senses, the training period is always heavily emphasized. It's like learning to read. You have to gain a new type of literacy. I remember I went to one of your events a couple of years ago on Valentine's Day, where in each room you guys explored a different sense, but everything was kind of themed around love, and it was really fantastic and beautiful. In one of the rooms, you were exploring orientation in a room, and you used a laptop and a camera to kind of detect my exact position around the camera and change the sound effects. So I basically started seeing with my ears, right? And now we understand that that's an incredibly useful invention for the sighting pad. But it also makes me wonder, I mean, this was an event for kind of couples or just people who, like me, like to walk around in weird glasses in weird environments. Who doesn't? So how do you see these technologies trickling down to kind of recreational or entertainment level? How will, average users of technology engage with these tools that are currently being used to help those who have a vital need to try them?
Well, I think that the main advantage of this technology over things like implantation or direct neural interface, things like this, is that it's non-invasive. It's completely non-invasive. And so I could see it being used to convey information that might be relevant or useful in our daily lives that currently we can't have access to easily.
Like knowing where north is, unless you were a Girl Scout like myself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So like that. But also, it allows you to do so in a very almost intimate way, because it's no longer a cognitive, intellectual process where you're deducing information, but it's something that is...
It becomes part of your toolkit as a human.
Exactly.
In a way, right?
It's part of you, especially if it's something like touch, which is very intimate. It's something that usually is controlled by you, and if you receive it from somewhere else, then that has a series of emotional implications. And so I could totally see it being used, for example, for distance communication, so for conveying touch through across the internet. So if you were to wear some kind of stimulator that was able to replicate certain parts, certain characteristics of touch, and you were able to learn with another person that when they do a certain movement, then you feel that, then that could be a potential application that would be very interesting. Because, I mean, we already see similar kinds of things with internet-based sex toys for couples, where they each can feel whatever's happening on the other end. So we could...
With the heartbeat trackers and things like that.
And stuff like that, yeah. So you have things that are designed to bring people who are far apart closer together through the senses, which is something that's, I think, very powerfully emotional, and we could be seeing through this technology.
So you're Skyping with your son, and you can kind of kiss him goodnight, and he would be wearing something that would give the impression, even though it wouldn't replicate the feeling perfectly well, but the gesture contains the same amount of emotion. Yeah,
and it's all about the associations that you've already formed. I mean, if your brain has linked this kind of touch to that kind of input, then you're more likely to be able to reassociate that as being the same as getting the kiss or being stroked or so on, especially because those are things that your brain already knows. I mean, these are sensations that are already known to you, that you already relate to something, which are always easier to learn than something that's entirely alien. But also...
So you can kind of build on the imagination of the person and involve them in the creation of this fantasy.
For sure. And also, I think for things like virtual reality, it might be quite useful. I mean, for
a good combination of the two technologies?
Yes. Because the good thing about virtual reality, of course, is that it can give you any environment you want. It can simulate, and you're already, as a user, predisposed to try and suspend your disbelief a little bit, try and assimilate it, try to learn it. So you'd be a bit more receptive, I think, to this kind of substitution if you're already primed for that.
Right.
So I could envision, for example, some gloves that had a series of haptic actuators that could do a few different things. And from that, you could probably train to get some sensations from that were replicating things that you would be able to feel in that situation, in that environment that's being replicated in virtual reality. Or even give you information. So, for example, if you're playing a video game where you need to...
You get punched in the face?
Exactly.
Just to kind of to raise the stakes, right?
Yeah. And you'd be able to get a sensation that wasn't painful necessarily, but you would relate it to that. No, yes, it's like, and it's like it's not. Oh, my guy has been shot.
And you could test like how much better people actually get at these games when this kind of fake pain can happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's endless things you could do with it.
But I think this kind of brings me to my next point, which is, do you see, where do you see any ethical open questions around this technology? When we talk about social media or even AR, VR, we talk about how, people are becoming a bit immune to new impulses, or humans are made to compete with, augmented images that put us kind of in a worse position. So do you see, when you do your daily job, what are the things that you think like, I have to pay attention to this stuff. I don't want this technology to go in that direction, or I want to inform people that there's a danger about this thing. Do you see any areas like that?
Absolutely, yes. I think that the technology itself doesn't have as much of the direct ethical problems as more implanted, more invasive things, but it still is a way to get information that you wouldn't normally have more easily and more constantly. And if mobile phones have taught us anything, is that if you give a human a source of information, they will be on it 24/7.
They will use it, and they will want more and not less.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just imagine the example that I linked. I mean, I use Twitter quite a bit, so this may or your mileage may vary. But if somebody linked my favorite Twitter feeds to a device that vibrated in a way every time I get a mention or anytime something happened, I would never be able to get my mind off it.
Yeah.
That's
actually a very, very scary idea, but I can totally
hard
imagine
enough.
that it's in the making somewhere in some lab.
Exactly. I mean, it's hard enough with just the phone
Because
that you
you're
put it
already
away.
getting the hormones. Just
So-
imagine that it's tied to actual physical pleasure.
Mhm. Yeah, and also the fact that you could, in some way, use this kind of technology to hack interpersonal relations, because a lot of interpersonal relations rely on a little bit of white lie kind of situation. I mean, sometimes people will say things that aren't entirely true, and deep down you know that they're not, but you sort of let them, and there's a lot of unspoken contracts in interpersonal relations. But let's say you had a device that could tell how warm people's cheeks were, or how sweaty they were, or things like that, signs of lying or signs of nervousness, and you were able to not just subconsciously understand those, but consciously know exactly that, and from that
Quantify that.
derive their state.
Sure.
That would make you a very good manipulator.
Yeah.
That would allow you to, if you were so inclined, potentially do some not very great things socially, and that could be another problem. I mean, or
generally just matching. You mentioned these kind of Pavlovian training possibilities that we humans have, and it's kind of just. I mean, I can see this leading in the wrong direction when we start matching things up. I think Jonathan Haidt mentions this piece of research they did where they show somebody something disgusting and then the photo of a political candidate, and you will not like them that much. So imagine if, taste and, I don't know, a political campaign are, we are already doing this. We know that McDonald's is red because you start salivating when you look at red stuff, and things like that. But this can be pushed to the extreme, right?
Yeah, and it's another channel that can be used to try and manipulate you, as you say. So if you have, say, if we developed some device that stimulated taste artificially, then yeah, absolutely, we could have maybe adverts that display taste. So I mean, it's hard enough to resist when you're hungry looking at a picture of a burger, but imagine if you could actually taste it as well.
Oh, wow.
Imagine that.
Oh, yeah.
That would be pretty...
And would it be the real one? Because McDonald's photos don't usually look like the actual product at the end, right?
I mean, like an actual thing. Nice.
Yeah.
Not... Yeah. But,
How do you see this playing out in personal relationships? Because how do we choose which people become our friends or lovers? Currently, we look at the amount of intellectual, physical, emotional enjoyment and reciprocity that we can experience with them, right? I mean, otherwise we would be, maintaining relationships with everybody. We don't do that. We are selective. And I'm wondering if the senses get hacked, as you say, and as you guys are working on, how will we be making better decisions? Or is it going to be like, this guy has a better kit?
I mean, that's a very good question. And I think that's something that's very hard to answer, because the idealist in me says the more information you have, the better decisions you make. But then...
But is this information the same way as somebody's natural smell is information?
Well, that's the thing. But you can fake that. I mean, you can get... there are these colognes you can get that have pheromones in them, or you can have... Or you can... there's ways around all of these things, so...
We've been probably hacking the senses since day one.
Oh, yeah.
From
Just not
tool
as
making
efficiently.
to body makeup. But it's a different ethical question to me when I look at, okay, so these tools might be very expensive. Some people will be able to afford manipulating me, and they will have an unfair advantage, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing with any new technology that makes you better at anything or gives you better chances. Naturally, the first people to get it are going to be the people with more money, and they're already likely to be people who are better prepared anyway. So it sort of widens the divide. But I think that's a problem with all technology. Really, it's not
a tool
unique to here, but I think. Yeah, I'm always quite torn on that one because the engineer scientist in me says, yes, let's make more things and better
Move
things.
Fast,
but
break
then,
things,
but then you think, oh, well, I don't mind breaking things, but I don't like breaking people. And that also happens. So
I think that should be a lot of people's motto. I have a billion other questions, but I thought maybe let's conclude with this one. Do you use currently in your own personal life any such tool at the moment?
Well, I used to. I used to have actually one of these belts that I described. I mean, it wasn't the original one. I just made my own, and I tried it for a while, and it definitely is interesting. I mean, you do get that sense of something. You do get that something that isn't quite touch, but it isn't. It's really hard to describe what it's like, but it certainly is something perceptual. And I am looking forward to getting something that's wearable that is not visible or not immediately weird. So I can wear it in more formal situations as well.
White tie and sensory belt.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe that will be completely widespread in a couple of years.
Possibly. As long as we make them. The thing is, us engineers tend to be okay at making things, not so great at making them look good. At least the ones in my area. I don't nothing to say against you engineers who actually can do these things. Much respect.
I think that's a very fun and interactive way to where to stop. Engineers, please email us your comments to Karl's statement. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And check out Hack the Senses, and let's hack the senses. See you guys next time.